Hello and welcome to Make Your Business Human, a timely and engaging look at this new world of business. So whether your goals are to develop the next generation of leaders, motivate your sales team, or just better understand your customers, Making Your Business Human is about understanding the seismic shift that both customers and employees have undergone in the last 10 years. And that shift should have all of us rethinking how we engage with each other.
What I am here to do today is just help us refocus on the important parts of being human. Those things, those similarities that we all share, those common bonds, because when we focus intentionally on the similarities that we share, it makes it for a better customer experience, it makes it for a better working environment and the types of places that people want to do business with and people want to work for. Unfortunately, the reason we have to have that conversation now is because somewhere along the way, we stopped being human with each other. And this was not an overnight phenomenon. This is something that's been happening for years, but we started focusing a whole lot more on the differences that we have between each other. If you take that millennial conversation and the baby boomers, we sometimes forget that there are some baby boomers that have more millennial tendencies than half the millennial population. But when you put people into a box, what happens is it becomes a lot easier to talk at them. So as I went and I looked and I tried to find what are those similarities, what are those things that bring us together? What are the things that all millennials and baby boomers and all men and women could understand and believe in? I've come up with what I call the 4 human truths.
My goal with every audience, regardless of the topic, is to simplify the conversation. And the 4 human truths are a way that we can help move audiences away from the differences that we share and more focused on how we move together. Now, during the course of a keynote, I will hit on all 4. We'll talk about 1, as humans, how we are all in search for community and how we can better find it and build it in the workplace and in our personal lives. Number 2, how we can celebrate failure a little bit more and use it to reject the fear that is permeating organizations and teams. Number 3, how our perception of time can impact our priorities. And lastly, how we can take ownership of our choices.
We've got a lot of choices to make. And we have choices in how we're gonna act. We got choices in how we're gonna respond. And when you think about our ability as humans, we have this ability to understand that our actions, our reactions, our communication, what we do and say, it's a choice. Nobody's making us do anything. We have this ability as humans to make these choices. So own it. Own the choices that you make. Own the choices, the email that we put, anybody else put like the email in the draft folder? Because you don't want to send it right now because you're really upset at what that person did or said, and you wait and you come back the next day. I see some people like, yeah, I just send it. Yeah. Becky in finance, she is just always on me. Public speaking, when surveyed, is the number 1 fear that people have, which I find hilarious because 1 is definitely clowns and 2 is definitely clowns, okay? But if I ask you the number 2 fear that people have that shows up, it's actually not death, that was 3rd. The 2nd is failure. 30 to 40% of people say the number 2 fear they have is failure, which I find hilarious because we fail every day. And it really becomes about how do we perceive failures, how do we perceive it in the workplace, how do we perceive it when people have a bad day and they show up, they don't give their best. Do we look at that as a failure, or do we look at that as an opportunity to grow, or look at it as an opportunity that maybe somebody's just having a bad day? Is your team, is the relationships that you're building with your customers, do they know that it's okay to fail and that you'll be there to support them and build the community up like you've been talking to them and building them up with them over the years? Because if they are, they're gonna outperform, they're gonna do better because they're willing to fail. The 3rd human truth I want to talk about is this, our relationship with time. That is another thing that as humans we are all experiencing, whether or not we know it or not, or whether or not we just try not to think about it. But the reality is our perception of time can impact our behavior and it can impact the behavior of people around us. I'm sorry to use another parenting example. I know everybody in the room is probably not a parent, but I think even if you're not a parent, you can understand this. That when you are a parent, especially with like really younger children, maybe under the age of 10, there are some days that are excruciatingly long. And this last year, we've experienced that, like trying to get work done when you got people knocking on the door coming in. I want to show you a drawing. You know, it's like working. But we also know that if you talk to people whose kids are not out of the house, they'll tell you that the years are short. So which one is it? Are the days long or the years short? Maybe it's both. I do think it's funny though when you talk to these parents though, they tell you really ridiculous, cute things like, oh, cherish the younger years, little kids, little problems, which I don't think that's the case. I think they're big problems. I think they're real big problems sometimes. If I asked you right now, what's the most important thing to you in your life? Does it match where you're spending your time? Does it, because if I ask people where your priorities, a lot of people say meetings, right? Well, my calendar runs my day. It's the meetings. In some cases, we just don't know. We don't know where our priorities are at. And so if we can figure out those moments, if we can figure out what is most important to us, then we can make sure that we're allocating the right resources to that. But from a customer standpoint, when we understand their priorities and what's most important to them, then we're also well positioned to help them succeed in what they're trying to do. Has anybody heard of Robin Dunbar before? Robin Dunbar is a British anthropologist and philosopher who back in the early 2000s wanted to answer this question: how many people can any one person care about at a given time? So if you think of your brain like a computer, how many people, relationships can you put in your brain at once? And what he found out is that that number is 150. Now I want to be really clear about something. When we look at this, how many people can you care about? There is no limit to the number of people you can care about. I don't know everybody in this room, but I should absolutely want to see each one of you successful, happy, living a fulfilled life. So there's no limit to the number of people I can care about. But when he's talking about care, he's talking about those more emotional, connected relationships. When we think about our brain's ability for these 150 relationships, we have to then compare that to the world at which we're inundated with every single day, to the millions of articles, to the millions of bits of information in relationships. And that's why we get a little stuck. That's why it feels like this world is increasingly larger, but we're still in search for this localized sense of community. And so the question I have to ask you all is, how intentional are we being in finding our community?